The door slammed. The porch light flicked off. Cold rain hit his face like thrown gravel. Harlan Pierce stood on the steps in his slippers, watching his daughter twist the chain lock with steady hands. A black plastic bag sagged at his feet, stuffed with shirts and a Bible that had belonged to his wife. Thunder rolled through the neighborhood like a freight train. He did not beg. Pride felt thin in the rain, yet he wore it anyway, buttoned up inside an old wool cardigan. Maeve's voice had been cool and clipped, the way she sounded at work when she spoke to staff. "Dad, you cannot stay here anymore. We talked about this." Her husband, Clive, hovered behind her in the hall with a towel around his neck from the gym, eyes on the floor. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and new paint. Harlan stepped back onto the wet step and the door shut, the chain biting into the brass plate. Harlan was 70 years old and had lived in Cedar Street, Brookhaven, Georgia, since 1983. He had built custom cabinets across Fulton County, cutting oak by touch and memory, and had raised 2 children after his wife, Nora, passed on a winter morning. He had cooked their breakfasts and checked their homework and drove them to choir and baseball. He wore his grief like a work apron, stained and useful. The years had turned him quiet, not weak. People mistook one for the other. His son, Dorian, had stopped calling after a fight about money last spring. Maeve had taken the lead on everything since then, speaking about power of attorney and efficiency as if he were a broken microwave. She had brought pamphlets about lifestyle communities. She said the word community as if it were a hotel. Harlan had said he wanted to mow his own grass, to fix his own loose hinge, to sleep in his own chair. She said love meant safety. He said love meant freedom. The talks turned into orders. The orders turned into a date. Rain came down harder. The plastic bag split, and a shirt slid out onto the step, the collar drinking water. Across the street, Mrs. Ellison's porch light clicked on, the old woman a shape behind the screen, one hand on a small dog. Harlan bent with his slow back, gathered the shirt, and tied the bag in a rough knot. His breath fogged, and he tasted metal. He had $34 in his pocket, a driver's license that listed a home which was no longer his, and the key ring with the little brass fish Nora had bought at a church fair. The ring held 3 keys. One no longer opened anything. He did not knock again. He stood there long enough to count to 100 in his head. Then he stepped off the porch and into the rain that washed Cedar Street clean. He walked past his truck, which now belonged to Maeve and Clive on paper, and turned toward the corner where a bus stop sign leaned. Water filled his slippers. Memories came at him like headlights. Nora laughing in the kitchen. Dorian's first home run. Maeve in a borrowed prom dress, spinning in the living room that smelled of popcorn and hairspray. Harlan kept walking. He had learned in the shop that hands keep moving even when the mind hurts. Cedar Street opened onto a strip of shops. Most were closed. A laundrette glowed blue through the glass, and a diner blinked open in red letters. Harlan went to the diner and stood under the awning to shake water from his sleeves. The window reflected his face. A stranger with white stubble, kind eyes, and raindrops clinging to his eyebrows stared back. He pressed the plastic bag to his chest and went inside. The bell above the door chimed, and a young man with a name tag that read Osric looked up from stacking plates. "Coffee?" Osric asked. "Yes, please," Harlan said. His voice sounded steady. He took the corner booth, put the bag on the seat beside him, and let the plastic crinkle like a small apology. The coffee came black and hot. He held the cup with both hands, the heat driving a tight ache from his fingers. The diner smelled of bacon and wet wool. A football game replayed on the television without sound. Harlan watched the rain stripe the glass and thought of the last word Nora had spoken into his neck. She had said, "Listen." He listened now. Past the clink of plates and the hiss of the grill, there was a rhythm under the noise. Trouble had a beat. He had heard it when a client tried to shave a price. He had heard it when a board was bowed though it looked straight. He had heard it when Maeve began to say phrases she had learned online, such as elder care solution. He sipped and felt the beat steady his breathing. The brass fish key ring rested on the table, dull in the light, and his thumb rubbed the scales until they shone. The second key on the ring, the small square one, opened a metal box at Peachtree First Bank. He had not thought about that box in years. He set down the cup. Rain whispered against the window. He took a napkin and wrote a list in small neat letters. Find a bed tonight. Check the box tomorrow. Call Pastor Len. The pen moved more easily than his hands felt. Hope worked like that sometimes. It came as a plain task. He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. Osric gave him a plate of eggs on the house. You look like you need it, the young man said, and Harlan nodded once. Pride could sit beside gratitude. There was room in him for both. He finished the coffee and asked where the nearest overnight shelter was. Osric circled an address on a takeout menu and slid it across. Harlan thanked him and stood up. The bell over the door chimed again, and a gust of rain pushed in, cool against his face. He pulled the cardigan tight and stepped back into the night, the list in his pocket and the box key warm against his palm. Headlights washed the pavement white. A taxi slowed, then moved on. He turned the corner toward the bus stop. A police cruiser rolled up and stopped at the curb. The window slid down. Maeve's face sat pale in the passenger seat, eyes rimmed red, mascara blurred. Clive sat in the back seat, silent, holding a folder. An officer leaned toward Harlan. Sir, are you Harlan Pierce? The rain paused as if the sky had drawn a breath. Harlan nodded. The officer's radio crackled. You need to come with us, the officer said, voice careful. There is a matter at the courthouse first thing in the morning, and it concerns you. Harlan's hand closed around the key. The cruiser door opened with a damp click. What waited on the other side would change everything. The morning came gray and slow, with light that crept through the blinds of the small shelter room where Harlan had managed to rest. The mattress had the weight of old springs, but sleep came to him in short bursts. The sound of rain dripping from the roof was steady, and every few moments, his mind replayed the voice of the officer from the night before. You need to come with us. He had nodded without a word, too tired to ask questions, too proud to show fear. The cruiser had dropped him off at the shelter, telling him to appear at the courthouse at 9. That was all. He washed his face in the cracked sink, the cold water cutting through the fog in his head. His reflection stared back with calm disbelief. Lines marked his face like wood grain, carved by years of work and worry. He put on his cleanest shirt from the bag and folded the others neatly before leaving. The city outside smelled of wet asphalt and bus exhaust. He walked 2 blocks to the courthouse, clutching the brass key ring in his hand, as though it could remind him that something in his life still belonged to him. When he reached the courthouse steps, Maeve was already there. Her hair was tied tight, her coat elegant, her face drawn pale from lack of sleep. Clive stood beside her, shifting his weight, his suit jacket slightly too new for comfort. Harlan paused at the bottom of the steps. Maeve saw him and looked away, wiping a tear before it could fall. He could not remember the last time she had cried in front of him. Inside, the courtroom felt larger than it was, painted in cream and oak. The sound of shoes on the polished floor echoed like whispers. Harlan sat where he was told. Across from him sat a lawyer in a navy suit who spoke softly with Maeve. The judge entered, a tall man with thin spectacles and eyes that studied before speaking. We are here to discuss the petition for guardianship regarding Mr. Harlan Pierce, he said. The words landed like stones. Harlan's chest tightened. He glanced at Maeve, who would not meet his eyes. Guardianship, he asked, voice steady but low. The lawyer cleared his throat. Yes, Mr. Pierce. Your daughter has filed to assume control over your financial and medical affairs, citing your inability to manage them. He blinked. Inability. He had balanced accounts for 30 years without missing a cent. He had paid for Maeve's college, Dorian's car, Nora's hospital bills. He had signed his name on every form that had ever mattered. His voice rose, slow and heavy. And what gives anyone the right to say I cannot live my own life? Maeve's voice broke through, trembling but sharp. Dad, it is not like that. I was only trying to protect you. You gave your truck title away to a stranger last year, remember? I sold it, Harlan said, to pay the property tax when Dorian forgot. The man gave me a fair deal. Clive looked down. The lawyer shuffled his papers. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Pierce, your daughter believes you may be at risk of exploitation. She's provided bank statements showing irregular withdrawals. Harlan leaned forward, his eyes clear and hard. Withdrawals I made. Every cent had a reason. You can ask me. The judge studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft hum of the air vent. Maeve's hand trembled as she placed a photograph on the table. It was of the old house on Cedar Street, now empty. Dad, the house is in my name now, she said. You signed it over. We thought. I signed it because you said you needed help with your mortgage, Harlan interrupted. You said you would add me back once you got settled. His words hung in the air like smoke. Maeve's eyes filled again, but she said nothing. The judge sighed and leaned back in his chair. It seems there are serious misunderstandings here. Mr. Pierce, do you have representation? Harlan shook his head. No, sir. I didn't know I needed one. The judge looked thoughtful. Then we will postpone for a week. Mr. Pierce, I suggest you obtain counsel. We cannot proceed without both sides properly represented. He struck the gavel lightly. Court adjourned. Maeve stood, her shoulders tight. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, please don't make this harder. I was trying to help you. He met her eyes. If that was help, I would hate to see harm. She turned away quickly, clutching her coat. Clive followed, his silence heavy as guilt. The courtroom emptied until only Harlan remained. He sat still, staring at the wooden table. The brass keyring glinted in his palm. He ran a thumb over the fish charm. Peachtree First Bank. The box. Outside, the sun had begun to burn through the morning fog. He walked slowly down the courthouse steps, each footfall sure and measured. People passed him without a glance. He reached the corner and stopped, looking across the street at the familiar blue sign of the bank. Something inside him stirred, an old, patient instinct that had guided him through harder times. He remembered Nora's voice again. Listen. He could almost hear her now, calm and steady. The memory brought a small, knowing smile to his lips. Harlan straightened his back, turned toward the bank doors, and stepped off the curb. Whatever lay inside that safety box might change everything, or confirm his fears about the family he had once trusted more than himself. He tightened his grip on the key. The bank doors swung open with a low chime, and as he stepped through, a figure from his past was waiting by the counter. It was someone he had not seen in 15 years, and the sight made him stop in his tracks. The man at the counter turned slowly, as if sensing Harlan before seeing him. His hair was grayer now, cut short around the ears, but his posture was unmistakable. Dean Mercer, Harlan's old business partner, the man who had once shared his workshop, his tools, and, for a time, his trust. Dean blinked twice, then let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Harlan Pierce. Thought you'd moved to Florida. Harlan's jaw tightened. Thought you were still paying back what you owed. Dean gave a short, nervous laugh. Still sharp, I see. How've you been, old friend? Better, Harlan said, though the word sat bitter in his throat. He walked past him to the counter, where the teller smiled politely. Good morning. I need to access my safety deposit box, he said, sliding the small square key across the marble surface. The teller took the key and checked his ID. Certainly, Mr. Pierce. Please follow me. Dean spoke again, voice quieter now. I heard about Nora. I meant to come by the funeral. You didn't, Harlan replied, not looking back. The words were not angry, just true. They followed the teller into a narrow hallway lined with small steel doors. The smell of old paper and metal hung in the air. When she left them alone, Harlan unlocked his box, the metal clicking open with a sound that carried him back decades. Inside lay a manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, and a small notebook bound in cracked leather. He lifted them gently. The sight of Nora's handwriting across the envelope made his breath catch. To Harlan, if anything ever happens to me. His hands trembled slightly. He sat at the small table, opened the envelope, and pulled out a single folded letter and a property deed. His eyes scanned the first line, and his chest tightened again. The deed was not for the Cedar Street house. It was for a piece of land outside Athens, 40 acres that had once belonged to Nora's uncle. Hurwell had transferred it quietly to Harlan years ago. Dean watched in silence. Didn't know Nora left you anything. She told me she sold it to pay the hospital bills, Harlan murmured. But she didn't. She kept it. The letter was short. Nora's words were written in her tidy hand. My love, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I know you'll hold everything together when I'm gone. But I want you to have something that's yours. The land by the creek is in your name now. Promise me you'll build again, even if it's only a small shop. Don't let the world take away your hands. Harlan folded the letter carefully and pressed it against his chest. For a moment, the noise of the city outside disappeared. Dean broke the silence. That land must be worth a good bit now. You could sell it, start over. Harlan looked up slowly. I'm not selling it. Dean nodded. Didn't think you would. But listen, I might have a way to help. I've got a friend in construction, big project coming up. They'll need custom interiors. Maybe you could. Harlan cut him off gently. You think I'm here to work for someone again? Dean hesitated. I think you're too proud to ask for help. Harlan closed the box and locked it. He turned to Dean, his eyes clear. Pride's the only thing I have left that no one tried to sign over. He placed the letter and deed carefully in his coat pocket and left the vault. Dean followed a few steps behind, speaking faster now. You still got that Pierce touch. People remember. You could do something with that land. Maybe even make them regret. Harlan stopped. The light from the bank's glass doors spilled across his face, cold and sharp. Regret's not what I want. Dean frowned. Then what do you want? Harlan looked out toward the courthouse across the street. Peace. But they'll have to earn theirs too. Outside, the sky had cleared. The rain had left puddles shining like mirrors along the curb. Harlan walked toward the bus stop again, feeling the weight of the paper in his pocket. He didn't know yet how, but he could sense the tide of things turning. Nora's land was more than inheritance. It was a chance to stand on something that no one could take. He caught the afternoon bus heading east and watched the city fade into long stretches of highway. The air smelled of diesel and damp earth. Across the aisle, a young woman with headphones tapped on her phone, humming softly. Harlan stared out the window and thought of the years he had lost, of all the quiet sacrifices that had left him nearly invisible. Not anymore. By the time the bus pulled into Athens, the sun had begun to drop behind the trees. He walked through the quiet streets until he reached the county records office. A tired clerk confirmed that the deed was still valid, still in his name. The land had sat untouched for 15 years. When he stepped back outside, the air felt lighter. The town was still small enough that stars began to show early. He walked down the road toward the edge of town, where the old dirt lane began. The path wound between tall pines until it opened into a clearing. The land was just as Nora had described. A creek curling through the grass, wildflowers along the bank, an old shed half collapsed near the trees. He stood there until the sky turned violet. Then he spoke aloud, as if Nora were beside him. You were right. This place still listens. He took the brass key ring from his pocket and placed it on a fence post, letting the setting sun glint off the little fish charm. You told me to build again, he said softly. So I will. But as he turned back toward the road, headlights swept across the clearing. A black SUV rolled slowly toward him, its tires crunching over gravel. The window slid down, and Maeve's voice came through the air, shaking. Dad, we need to talk. Harlan froze where he stood, the twilight reflecting in his eyes. Then start talking, he said. Her face was pale in the fading light. You don't understand what's happening. Someone's taken all the money from your old account. The night deepened, and Harlan felt the ground shift beneath him. Whatever game had begun in that courtroom was not over. It was only beginning. Maeve's words hung in the night air, brittle and cold. The sound of the creek filled the silence between them. Harlan stood still, his hand resting on the fence post beside him. The headlights from the SUV caught the lines in his face, each one carved by years of labor, loss, and love. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. What did you say? Maeve climbed out of the car, clutching her coat around her. The bank called this afternoon. They said nearly $50,000 was withdrawn from your savings account in the past month. It's gone, Dad. Harlan's brow furrowed. That's impossible. I haven't touched that account since Nora passed. Clive emerged from the driver's side, his face drawn tight. They said the withdrawals were authorized. The signature matches yours. That's because someone forged it, Harlan said, his voice hardening. And I bet you can guess who had access. Maeve's eyes widened. You think I did this? I think, Harlan said slowly, that I trusted you to handle my mail, my documents, and every little thing you said I was too old to manage. Her face flushed. I was trying to help. I never took your money. Clive cleared his throat. The police want to question you, Mr. Pierce. They're saying the withdrawals happened after you gave power of attorney to Maeve last year. Harlan's heart sank. The memory hit him like a hammer, signing a stack of papers at Maeve's kitchen table while she stood over him, smiling, saying, It's just in case something happens, Dad. He had signed because she was his daughter, because trust came easy when it wore a familiar face. He turned away, staring out over the land. Fireflies blinked along the creek, small lights in the dark. You two need to go, he said quietly. I'll deal with this myself. Maeve reached out. Dad, please. Go, he said again. She hesitated, tears glinting in her eyes. Then she turned back to the car. Clive started the engine, and the SUV rolled down the lane, its red taillights disappearing into the trees. Harlan stood alone in the clearing. The crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn cut through the night. He took the letter from his pocket, unfolding it beneath the silver light. Nora's words felt like a whisper in his ear. Don't let the world take away your hands. He spoke softly, as though she could hear. They tried, Nora. But maybe it's time I used them again. The next morning, he caught a ride into town with a farmer heading toward the feed store. The man dropped him off by a diner where the same brand of coffee steamed in chipped mugs, and the regulars read the news. Harlan ordered eggs and toast, then borrowed the phone behind the counter. His first call was to the bank manager who had known him for 30 years. Earl, it's Harlan Pierce. Someone's been taking my money, and I need the withdrawal slips from last month. Earl's voice came through the receiver, cautious. Harlan, I've been expecting your call. We've already flagged your account. But you should come in. There's something you need to see yourself. 2 hours later, Harlan sat across from Earl in a small office lined with faded photographs of local business owners. Earl slid a folder across the desk. We got surveillance footage from 2 of the withdrawals, he said. Harlan opened the folder and froze. On the screen capture, a man stood at the counter, signing the withdrawal form. He wore a baseball cap low over his brow, but his build was familiar, lean, with the slight stoop of someone who had worked long days on his feet. Harlan leaned closer. The man looked like Dorian. He stared at the photo, speechless. His son, the boy who had once sat on his lap to learn how to plane wood. The boy who had promised to look after Maeve when he went off to college. Earl sighed. I didn't want to say anything till I was sure. The signature matches yours, but the teller recognized the man when we showed her another photo. Said it was your son. Harlan's chest tightened. He closed the folder and took a long breath. Where is he now? No idea, Earl said softly. Last address we have is a place out near Macon. I'm sorry, Harlan. Harlan stood slowly. Don't be. You've helped more than you know. Outside, the day was warm, the sun bright against the storefront windows. He walked aimlessly for a while, each step heavy. The betrayal cut deeper than he had imagined possible. Yet beneath the ache, something else stirred, a calm that came not from resignation but from clarity. He had spent his life giving. Maybe now, he needed to take back what was his. That evening, he went back to the land. The air smelled of pine and soil. He built a small fire by the creek, using dry sticks and an old lighter he found in the shed. The flames crackled softly. He took Nora's letter from his pocket and read it again, letting the warmth touch his hands. Then he began to plan. If Dorian had stolen from him, it meant desperation, and desperation left trails. He would find his son, not to punish him, but to understand. Yet understanding would not mean forgiveness. Not yet. He took the small notebook from the safety box and flipped through the blank pages. On the first page, he wrote in firm, slow letters. What they took. What I'll reclaim. Underneath, he wrote the first item, my name. As the fire burned low, the night deepened. A car passed in the distance, and an owl called from the woods. Harlan sat still, eyes on the stars. The land hummed with quiet promise. Tomorrow, he would begin again. But as he stirred the ashes, something glinted in the dirt near his boot. A small, silver flash half buried beneath a stone. He picked it up, brushing away the soil. It was a flash drive, old and scratched, with a single word etched faintly on the side. Pierce. He turned it over in his palm, the metal cold against his skin. Someone had been here before him, and whoever left it behind might hold the truth that would change everything. The morning sun broke through the trees, spilling light over the clearing. Dew clung to the grass and shimmered like glass. Harlan sat on the steps of the old shed, turning the flash drive between his fingers. The single word engraved on it, Pierce, caught the light every time it turned. He could feel its weight, not in ounces, but in secrets. He knew he needed a computer to open it, but he owned nothing more modern than a transistor radio. The closest library was 12 miles away in downtown Athens. He packed the flash drive carefully in his coat pocket, along with Nora's letter and the deed, then set off down the dirt road. The bus was late, so he walked most of the way, letting the rhythm of his boots match the beating of his thoughts. Every few steps, he saw Dorian's face in his mind, the smiling boy on the baseball field, the proud man shaking hands after his first job, then the hollow-eyed stranger who now stood accused of theft. Harlan had spent a lifetime believing that love was proof against betrayal. He was learning it was not. When he reached the library, the smell of old paper and varnished floors welcomed him. A young librarian with kind eyes and a badge that read Miss Harper asked softly, "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to use a computer," Harlan said. His voice carried the weight of quiet authority, like someone who had once taught others how to work with their hands. She guided him to a terminal and showed him how to insert the flash drive. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder with a single file. Invoices_2022.pdf. Harlan clicked it open. Dozens of scanned receipts appeared, all bearing the name Pierce Custom Interiors. His name. His old company. He leaned closer. Each invoice was stamped paid in full. The signatures were forged but perfect. The clients listed, high-end renovations, office fittings, and hotel projects, were all recent, long after his company had been dissolved. Someone had revived the business in his name. He clicked through until one name froze him in place. Dean Mercer. The file showed payments from Dean's construction firm to Pierce Custom Interiors LLC, totaling nearly $100,000. The account number at the bottom matched the bank where Dorian's withdrawals had been made. The realization hit him hard. Dorian had not acted alone. Dean had always known how to bend rules and people. When their partnership ended 15 years earlier, Dean had taken contracts that never got finished and left Harlan to deal with the angry clients. The memory of that betrayal had never quite left him, though he had buried it deep beneath forgiveness. Now the truth rose like smoke. He printed several pages of the invoices, folded them neatly, and slid them into his pocket. Miss Harper noticed his silence and asked, "Is everything all right?" Harlan gave a faint smile. "It will be." Outside, the air was warm and bright, but his thoughts ran cold. He knew what had to be done. The next bus heading toward Brookhaven left at 2, and he intended to be on it. He needed to look Dean Mercer in the eye again, this time not as an old friend, but as a man ready to reclaim what had been stolen twice. The ride took 3 hours. As the bus pulled into the edge of the city, memories returned like ghosts. The diner, the house on Cedar Street, the laughter of a family long gone. He stepped off at the main stop and walked toward Dean's construction office, a squat brick building near the railway tracks. Dean's truck sat in the car park, the same red model Harlan had once helped him buy. Harlan waited near the fence until Dean came out, talking on his phone, his voice loud with confidence. When he hung up, Harlan stepped forward. Dean startled. "Harlan, you shouldn't be here." "I saw the invoices," Harlan said evenly. "You've been using my name." Dean's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "I understand plenty. You set up a fake company under my name, ran jobs through it, and used my son as your errand boy. You paid him to withdraw my money so it would look like I was still in business." Dean exhaled sharply, trying to regain composure. "It wasn't like that. Dorian came to me, said he needed work. I gave him something to do. He didn't know the details." "You used him," Harlan said, voice rising. "Just like you used me." Dean's eyes darted toward the door. "You can't prove anything." Harlan reached into his coat and pulled out the printed invoices. "You think so?" Dean's confidence wavered. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Here's what's going to happen," Harlan said, stepping closer. "You're going to sign a statement admitting you used my business name without consent. Then you're going to transfer every cent that belongs to me, plus interest, into a new account. Or I walk straight to the sheriff's office with these papers." Dean's expression shifted from arrogance to panic. "You'd ruin me." Harlan's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "You did that yourself." Dean looked around as if searching for an escape, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll fix it." Harlan handed him a pen and a page torn from his notebook. "Start writing." Dean signed the confession with a trembling hand. When it was done, Harlan folded the page carefully and tucked it away. "You've got until tomorrow," he said. "If the funds aren't there by noon, I make it public." Dean said nothing. His shoulders sagged as Harlan turned and walked away. That night, Harlan checked into a small motel by the highway. He sat by the window, the confession page beside him, and watched headlights pass along the road. He felt neither triumph nor relief, only the quiet ache of justice long delayed. He opened Nora's letter again, her words soft against the sound of traffic. "Build again." He smiled faintly. "I will, Nora. But first, I'll finish this." As he reached to turn off the lamp, the phone on the bedside table rang. The sound cut through the stillness like a blade. He hesitated, then lifted the receiver. "Mr. Pierce," a male voice said. "This is Officer Ramirez, Brookhaven Police Department. I'm afraid there's been an incident." Harlan's hand tightened around the phone. "What kind of incident?" The officer's tone was grave. "It's your son, sir. Dorian Mercer Pierce. He's been found unconscious in an abandoned workshop near the river. We need you to come down immediately." The line went quiet except for the hum of the motel lamp. Harlan's heart thudded once, heavy and slow. He stood, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the night, back into a storm he thought he had already survived. The night air pressed damp and heavy against Harlan's skin as he crossed the parking lot. The sound of traffic along the highway faded beneath the pulsing in his ears. A police cruiser waited near the entrance, headlights idling. Officer Ramirez stood beside it, a broad man with tired eyes and the posture of someone used to giving bad news. "Mr. Pierce?" "Yes," Harlan said, his voice low but firm. Ramirez nodded once. "Get in. We'll take you to the scene." The drive was silent, broken only by the hum of the engine. City lights melted into the darker edge of Brookhaven's industrial district, where warehouses leaned like sleeping giants beside the river. The smell of oil and rust filled the air. When the cruiser stopped, a flicker of red and blue lights painted the water in restless color. They stepped out onto cracked pavement. Police tape fluttered near a half-collapsed building marked Mercer Construction and Supply. Inside, medics knelt beside a stretcher. Harlan's breath caught when he saw the figure lying there. Dorian. His face was pale, his hands scraped, his eyes half open but unfocused. "Dad," the boy murmured. His voice sounded distant, like someone speaking through water. Harlan moved forward, ignoring the officer's warning. "I'm here, son. Don't move." He knelt beside the stretcher, brushing the dirt from Dorian's sleeve. The young man looked thinner than he remembered, the sharpness of guilt carved into every line of his face. The medic looked up. "He's lucky. Someone called it in early. Looks like he hit his head trying to climb out that side window." Ramirez frowned. "Any sign of forced entry?" "None," the medic said. "But there's blood near the desk and a smashed hard drive." Harlan's eyes followed the direction of the man's gesture. A workbench stood against the far wall, scattered with papers, tools, and the remains of a computer. His heart sank. Dean had been here. Dorian stirred again. "Dad, I didn't mean." Harlan gripped his shoulder. "Save your strength." Tears mixed with the grime on the young man's face. "Dean said it was business. Said it would help us both. But when I tried to pull out, he said he'd ruin you. He made me take the money." The words landed like blows. Harlan felt the years of fatherhood tighten in his chest. The birthdays, the laughter, the lessons on honesty and hard work. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked softly. Dorian's eyes fluttered. "I was ashamed." The medics lifted the stretcher and carried him toward the ambulance. Harlan followed until the doors closed. The engine started, lights flashing away into the distance. The rain began again, light and cold. Ramirez stayed beside him. "Mr. Pierce," he said quietly, "we'll need you to make a statement. It looks like someone tried to destroy evidence inside." Harlan nodded. "I'll tell you everything I know. But you need to find Dean Mercer before he disappears." "We're already trying," Ramirez replied. "He's not at his office or home. Left his truck behind, though." "Then he's running," Harlan said. "And I know where he'll go." The officer gave him a questioning look. "Out to the land near Athens," Harlan continued. "That's where this started. That's where he'll think I won't follow." Ramirez studied him. "You sure you want to be involved in this?" Harlan looked toward the river, where the lights of the ambulance had vanished. "It's my name they used, my son they broke, and my life they tried to steal. I'll be involved until the last nail's driven." By dawn, Harlan was already on the road. He drove an old pickup borrowed from the station, the radio silent, the miles passing beneath the tires in long stretches of thought. The mist lifted as the sun rose, revealing the familiar dirt road that led to Nora's land. When he arrived, the place felt different, disturbed. Footprints led from the gate toward the shed. The door hung open. Inside, papers from his notebook were scattered across the floor, and the small fire pit had been overturned. The smell of smoke and gasoline lingered. Dean had been there, searching. Maybe for the flash drive. Maybe to destroy what he thought Harlan still had. Harlan walked slowly through the shed, every creak of the boards echoing in his chest. Near the workbench lay something half buried under ashes, a torn envelope. He bent down, brushing it clean. The handwriting was his own, but the content made his stomach turn. It was a fake letter, one that appeared to give Dean control of the property and the right to sell it. The signature at the bottom was forged again. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his pocket, and stepped outside. The morning light struck the creek in streaks of gold. For a long moment, he stood still, breathing deeply, until the sound of a car engine broke the stillness. A black sedan rolled into view, stopping a few yards away. Dean stepped out, wearing the same jacket as before, but this time his face was pale and drawn. "You shouldn't be here, Harlan," he said. "This isn't your fight anymore." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "It's always been mine. You took my name, my business, and now you try to take my son. It ends here." Dean's hand trembled as he reached into his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small flash drive identical to the one Harlan had found. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. "That drive you found, it's just one piece. There's more. Enough to bury everyone involved." "Everyone," Harlan repeated. "Including you?" Dean hesitated. "Including people you don't want to cross." "Then maybe they should have thought twice before stealing from me," Harlan said. Dean gave a weary laugh. "You're too old for this." Harlan's gaze was steady. "You'd be surprised what age can do when it's got nothing left to lose." They stood facing each other in the quiet clearing. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of rain and pine. Dean finally dropped the drive into the grass between them. "Take it. You'll see for yourself. But when you do, you'll wish you hadn't." He turned, climbed back into the car, and drove off down the lane, the tires spinning mud into the air. Harlan waited until the sound faded before kneeling to pick up the second flash drive. He turned it in his hand, cold and heavy like the first. Whatever truth it held was dangerous, but necessary. He looked up at the sky, where the sun had just broken free of the clouds, and murmured to the air, "All right, Nora, I'll listen." Then he pocketed the drive and walked toward the truck. Tomorrow, he would take it to the police. But tonight, he would learn exactly what his old friend had been hiding, and why Dorian's life had nearly been the price. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he glanced back once more at the land. The creek glimmered under the morning light, quiet and watchful, as if it knew the worst was yet to come. The road back to town shimmered with heat as the afternoon sun climbed higher. Harlan drove slowly, the tires crunching over gravel, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The flash drive sat on the passenger seat beside him, reflecting light with each turn. It looked harmless, just a scrap of metal and plastic, yet it pulsed with danger, with truth, with ghosts. He stopped at a roadside diner halfway to Brookhaven. The place was small, a white-painted building with faded red booths and the smell of coffee that had been brewing since morning. He took a corner seat and ordered nothing but water. His hands rested on the table, fingers tapping in thought. He knew that once he looked at the files, there would be no going back. Whatever Dean had hinted at, whatever shadowy names were involved, they were bound to reach deeper than money or pride. He slid the flash drive into his pocket, stood, and asked the waitress, "You have a public computer here? Something for customers?" She nodded toward a small terminal near the restrooms. "Old, but it still works." Harlan thanked her and walked over. The computer wheezed as it started. He inserted the flash drive and waited. It opened slower than the last one, the fan humming. A single folder appeared, labeled Accounts_Archive. Inside were dozens of files, all with coded names. He clicked one at random, and his breath caught. The document displayed a list of transactions, large sums of money transferred between companies he recognized from the local county projects, including contracts Dean's firm had secured. Each one bore a digital signature, Mercer Construction in partnership with Pierce Custom Interiors. The pattern was clear. Dean had been laundering funds through the shell company in Harlan's name. But one column made him pause. Besides several transactions was a new name, A.L. Benton, County Infrastructure Committee. Harlan scrolled further and saw signatures from council officials, all approving bids at inflated costs. His old business had become a ghost used to funnel money through public projects. The realization hit him like a hammer. This wasn't just theft, it was corruption. He printed 3 of the most damning pages and slipped them into his coat pocket. Then he pulled the flash drive out and held it in his palm. If the wrong person learned he had it, they wouldn't stop at threats. They'd come for him the same way they'd gone after Dorian. The waitress called across the counter. "Everything all right, sir?" Harlan managed a thin smile. Yes, ma'am. Everything's finally starting to make sense. He paid for the water and stepped outside. The heat had thickened, the air buzzing with the sound of insects. He headed straight for the Brookhaven police station, the folder under his arm. Ramirez was at his desk when Harlan entered. Mr. Pierce, the officer said, standing quickly. How's your son? In hospital. He'll recover, Harlan said. But I think I've found what put him there. He laid the flash drive and papers on the desk. These show Dean Mercer was laundering public funds through a fake company in my name. Dorian was a pawn. Ramirez skimmed the pages, eyebrows narrowing. This is serious. If this checks out, we're looking at federal crimes. It checks out, Harlan said flatly. There's more where that came from. Ramirez picked up the phone and called in a detective. Within minutes, the small office filled with quiet urgency. They copied the files, logged the evidence, and took Harlan's statement. Through it all, he sat calm, though his hands trembled slightly under the table. When the detective left, Ramirez said, You've done a brave thing, Mr. Pierce. But this won't be over soon. These men have influence. You might want to lay low for a while. Harlan nodded. I'll be on my land. That's all I have left. He left the station at sunset. The air had cooled, and the sky blazed gold and crimson. As he walked toward the bus stop, a small car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down. Maeve leaned out, her face pale with worry. Dad, she said, I want to see Dorian. He told me everything. Harlan paused, his expression unreadable. Then you know what kind of storm we're standing in. I know, she said, voice breaking. And I'm sorry. For all of it. I shouldn't have taken control away from you. I just thought that I was fragile, he finished. That I needed saving. She nodded, tears forming. You were the strongest person I knew. I just didn't want to lose you like we lost Mom. The words softened him. The anger he had carried began to loosen its grip. He reached out, his hand resting gently on her arm. Maeve, you didn't lose me. You just stopped seeing me. She nodded again, tears falling freely. Let me help you now. Please. He looked away toward the horizon, where the sun dipped below the trees. All right, he said at last. But we do this my way. They drove together in silence back toward the land. When they arrived, dusk had settled. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the faint scent of rain. The creek murmured nearby, calm but restless, as if waiting for something to unfold. Maeve parked the car and turned to him. What happens now? Harlan looked out over the clearing, where the remains of the old shed still stood. Now, he said, we rebuild. Not just the land, everything. He stepped out of the car, his boots sinking softly into the grass. Fireflies began to rise in the dark, small points of light drifting upward like sparks. Maeve followed him to the porch, and they stood together, watching the night gather. Inside the house, the phone rang. Harlan entered and picked it up. Ramirez's voice came through, tense and quick. Mr. Pierce, we've got Mercer. He's in custody, but there's something you should know. He's asking to see you. Says he won't talk to anyone else. Harlan's jaw tightened. Tell him I'll come in the morning. He hung up slowly, looking out at the land once more. The creek glinted under the moonlight, a silver thread winding through shadow. Tomorrow, the truth would finally face him head-on. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. As he turned off the light and sat in the silence, Nora's words came back to him once more, soft, steady, and sure. Build again. And he would. But before he could build anything new, he had one more reckoning left to face. The next morning broke with a pale, gold light. Mist rolled across the creek and hung over the grass like a slow breath. Harlan stood on the porch, sipping his coffee from a chipped mug. The warmth steadied him, though his thoughts were far from calm. The day ahead promised answers, and he knew answers always came at a cost. Maeve stepped outside, her eyes red from lack of sleep. You sure you want to go alone? She asked quietly. I've faced worse, he replied. Besides, this isn't a fight. It's a finish. She nodded and handed him his coat. As he slipped it on, she said, Dorian's awake. The doctor says he'll be all right. The news softened his expression. Good. Maybe we'll all start healing now. He drove to the Brookhaven Police Department just as the sun burned through the fog. Inside, Officer Ramirez was waiting, a file tucked under his arm. Mercer's been in the interrogation room all morning, he said. He hasn't said much except that he'll only talk to you. Harlan followed him down the corridor. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The sound of doors locking echoed behind them. Ramirez opened the door to a small room with a single metal table and 2 chairs. Dean Mercer sat on one side, his wrists cuffed, his face drawn and pale. He looked older, smaller somehow, as if the weight of his own lies had compressed him. When Harlan entered, Dean gave a thin smile. "Never thought I'd see you in a place like this, old friend." "I didn't think I'd see you alive," Harlan said, sitting down across from him. Dean chuckled weakly. "Alive's a matter of definition. They've got me on fraud, conspiracy, and something about bribery. Said I could face 20 years. You earned every one," Harlan replied. Dean leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You don't understand, Harlan. This goes beyond me. The councilman, Benton, he wasn't the top. He was just another pawn. They used me to move the money, same way I used your company name." Harlan's gaze hardened. "You're telling me this now to buy mercy?" Dean shook his head. "No. I'm telling you because they'll come after you next. You're the last link. The name Pierce is all over those documents. They'll need a scapegoat." Harlan studied him for a long moment. There was fear in Dean's eyes, but not guilt. Fear of the men above him, the kind who didn't wear badges or answer phones. "You should have thought of that before dragging my family into it," Harlan said. Dean's voice cracked. "I tried to stop it. They said if I didn't move the money, they'd expose the old tax evasion from our partnership. You remember that job in '09? Harlan's fists clenched. "The one you handled behind my back. You forged my name then, too." Dean's silence was answer enough. The door opened. Ramirez stepped in. "Mr. Pierce, we need a statement from you before we proceed. Mercer's agreed to cooperate, but we'll need confirmation that the documents came from your possession." Harlan nodded. "You'll have it." Dean called after him as he stood to leave. "They'll come for you, Harlan. Benton's people don't leave loose ends." Harlan paused at the doorway, looking back. "I've been a loose end my whole life. I'll manage." Outside, the sky had cleared, and the air carried the scent of early autumn. He gave his statement, turned over the flash drives, and left the building feeling lighter yet strangely unsettled. Justice had begun its work, but peace still felt distant. He drove straight to the hospital. Dorian was sitting up when he arrived, a bandage across his forehead, eyes clear but heavy with shame. Maeve was beside him, holding his hand. When she saw Harlan, she rose, her expression tentative. "Dad?" Dorian said hoarsely. "I don't know how to apologize." Harlan sat on the edge of the bed. "You don't need to. Just tell the truth." "I was scared," Dorian said, his voice cracking. Dean made it sound like it was only numbers on paper. "He said no one would get hurt." "You got hurt," Harlan said gently. "And your sister. And me. But we'll move past it." Maeve placed a hand on her father's shoulder. "They said the investigation's widening. Dean's testifying against the people behind Benton. Looks like he might take down half the county office." Harlan gave a slow nod. "Good. Let them all fall." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of hospital machines steady and rhythmic. Dorian looked down. "What happens to us now?" Harlan thought for a moment before replying. "We start again. Not from anger, not from fear, just from what's left of us. The land's still there. That's home." Dorian's eyes filled. "You'd still have me there? After everything?" Harlan smiled faintly. A father doesn't stop being one because his son loses his way. When he left the hospital later that afternoon, the sky had turned the soft color of pewter. He stopped by a small hardware store on the way back to Athens, buying nails, lumber, and a second-hand saw. The clerk, a young man with a kind grin, helped him load the truck. "Starting a project?" he asked. "Finishing one," Harlan said. Back on the land, the air felt different, still scarred by what had happened, yet humming with renewal. The creek's water glimmered under the fading light. He unpacked the wood and began to work. His movements were slow but sure, guided by memory more than strength. Each cut and strike of the hammer felt like reclaiming something stolen. His purpose, his name, his peace. As the frame of a small workshop began to rise from the earth, Maeve's car appeared down the lane. She and Dorian stepped out, both holding paint cans. "Thought you could use some help," Dorian said quietly. Harlan looked at them, his eyes warm. "Always could." They worked together until twilight. The air filled with the smell of fresh-cut pine and sawdust, and laughter began to break the silence that had divided them. When darkness fell, they lit a lantern on the porch. Maeve sat beside her father, watching the creek. Do you think we'll ever be what we were before? She asked. No, Harlan said softly. But maybe we'll be something better. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the sound of crickets. Somewhere, far off, thunder grumbled, a reminder that storms always return. But Harlan felt no fear. He had stood in the rain before and survived it. He leaned back in his chair, the lantern light reflecting in his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more rebuilding, more life. And as the night deepened over Nora's land, Harlan whispered into the quiet, "We're building again, love." Just like you asked. The days that followed were gentler. The autumn sun mellowed the land, and the air smelled of cedar and fresh sawdust. Harlan's workshop began to take shape. A simple wooden structure with wide windows that caught the morning light and a porch that looked out over the creek. Each board he cut and nailed seemed to stitch something inside him back together. Maeve came most days, bringing food and paint. Dorian, still recovering, worked quietly beside his father, sanding the frames or sorting tools. Words were fewer now, but warmer. The distance that had stretched between them for years had thinned into something more like understanding. The past still lived between them, but it no longer ruled them. On the fourth evening, Harlan was tightening a hinge when a car approached, kicking dust along the lane. Ramirez stepped out, his face lined with fatigue. "Mr. Pierce," he called, "we need to talk." Harlan set the screwdriver down and wiped his hands. "Bad news." "Maybe," Ramirez said. "Mercer's dead." The hammer in Harlan's hand slipped and struck the porch rail. "Dead?" "His car went off the road last night, near the county line," Ramirez said. "The brake line was cut." Maeve gasped. Dorian went pale. "You think it was the same people behind the money?" Ramirez nodded grimly. "We think so. Mercer's statement was filed, but it's not public yet. We've put protection on Benton and 2 others, but this goes higher. Much higher." Harlan's jaw tightened. "And you came to warn me." "Yes," Ramirez said. "Until this settles, you need to keep your distance from town. Someone out there has reason to silence anyone linked to Mercer or the company name. That includes you." Harlan's gaze moved past the officer to the half-built workshop, then to his children standing behind him. "I'm not running again," he said quietly. "I've spent too many years doing that without moving an inch." "I'm not asking you to run," Ramirez replied. "Just stay alert. We'll keep watch." When the officer left, the silence thickened. The creek gurgled as if nothing had changed, yet the peace felt fragile. Maeve placed a hand on her father's arm. "Dad, maybe we should go somewhere else, at least until it's safe." "This is safe," he said softly. "This land's the first thing that's been truly ours." That night, the wind shifted. Clouds gathered low and heavy. Harlan worked long after dark, unable to rest. His thoughts circled back to Dean, his greed, his fear, his death. Nora's voice came again, soft as rain. "Listen." He stopped hammering and listened. The night was alive with sound. Crickets, the rustle of leaves, and beneath it all, the faint purr of an engine far down the road. Headlights flickered through the trees. His chest tightened. He stepped down from the porch, moving quietly. The car slowed near the gate, then stopped. 2 doors opened. Voices murmured, low, deliberate. He caught fragments. "Drive, documents, burn it." Harlan slipped back toward the shed where his tools lay. His hands found the heavy torchlight he kept beside the workbench. He switched it off, gripping it like a club. The figures came closer, their shadows stretching long in the moonlight. One carried a canister, the other a lighter. They reached the workshop steps. "That him?" one whispered. "Yeah, the old man. He's the last one." Rage flooded Harlan's veins, cold and clean. He stepped from the darkness, voice steady. "Looking for me?" The men spun around, startled. The taller one raised the canister, the metallic clank echoing in the quiet. "Stay back, old man." "Put it down," Harlan said. "You'll regret it otherwise." The shorter man sneered. "You think we won't?" Before he could finish, Harlan swung the torchlight. It struck his arm hard enough to send the lighter flying. The second man lunged, shoving Harlan backward. They stumbled onto the porch, the boards creaking under their weight. Inside the house, Maeve shouted his name. Dorian burst through the door, grabbing a shovel from beside the steps. He swung it wide, forcing the taller man back. The canister dropped, spilling liquid across the ground. The sharp smell of petrol filled the air. Harlan kicked it aside, his heart pounding. "Get back inside," he shouted to his children. But before anyone could move, The shorter man reached into his jacket, pulling something small and black, a gun. The sound of the safety clicking off froze the night. Harlan's breath caught. He had faced loss, humiliation, and betrayal, but never this kind of finality. He stood his ground. "If you're going to do it," he said, voice even, "do it looking me in the eye." The man hesitated. Maybe it was Harlan's calm. Maybe the years that lived in those eyes, steady and certain. The pause was enough. Ramirez's cruiser came roaring down the road, lights flashing. The men turned to run, but the officer's voice cut through the chaos. "Drop it." Now, 2 shots cracked the air, warning shots, and the intruders froze. Within seconds, more cars arrived, tires crunching on gravel, flashlights slicing through the trees. The men were cuffed and dragged toward the road. Ramirez approached Harlan, breathing hard. "We caught them tapping a car near Benton's place earlier. You were next." Harlan nodded, his pulse slowly steadying. "Then it's done." "For now," Ramirez said. "They'll talk. They always do." When the last of the cruisers pulled away, silence fell again. The scent of petrol still lingered, but the fire never came. Maeve stepped onto the porch, her eyes glistening. "You could have been killed," she whispered. Harlan looked toward the half-built workshop, then at his children. "We've already survived worse." The wind rose again, carrying the last traces of smoke and fear down the creek. The storm had come, and it had passed. What remained was the sound of night returning, steady, alive, and forgiving. He turned back toward the frame of the workshop, the lantern light flickering across the fresh wood. "Tomorrow," he said, "we finish this." Maeve smiled faintly through her tears. "Tomorrow," she echoed. And as the sky cleared, revealing a scatter of stars above the dark trees, Harlan Pierce, father, craftsman, survivor, stood once more on the land that had tried to take him and failed. The world around him had broken and rebuilt itself, but this time it would be built on truth. The sun rose slowly over Nora's land, spreading gold through the mist that clung to the creek. Dew glittered across the grass, and the scent of wet earth carried through the air. The world looked clean, renewed, as though the storm of the night before had washed away not just danger, but the weight of years. Harlan stood on the porch, a blanket over his shoulders, watching the morning light spill across the half-finished workshop. His hands ached, his ribs bruised, but there was peace in the pain. The fight was behind him. The work was ahead. Maeve came outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. "Too much quiet," he replied with a faint smile. "After a while, you start listening for the trouble that isn't there." She handed him a mug and sat beside him. Ramirez called early. The men they caught last night confessed. They were hired to silence Mercer and anyone linked to his records. "The state's taking over the case now." He nodded slowly. "Then it's over." "Almost," she said. "There'll be hearings. You might have to testify." "I'll do what's right," Harlan said. "Always have." They sat in silence, watching the creek wind through the grass. A hawk circled above the pines, its cry sharp and distant. The land breathed again, alive, free of the shadow that had hung over it. Dorian came down the path, his arms still bandaged, his steps cautious but steady. He stopped near the porch and looked up at his father. "Mind if I help you finish the roof today?" Harlan's smile deepened. "I was hoping you'd say that." The 3 of them worked through the morning. The rhythm of their labor filled the air, the scrape of the saw, the knock of the hammer, the murmur of voices that once might have been arguments, but now carried warmth. The workshop began to take form, its lines straight, its purpose simple. It was not grand, but it was honest. Around noon, Ramirez arrived in his cruiser, parking by the gate. He walked over, his uniform dusty, his expression calm. "I came to bring you something," he said, handing Harlan a sealed envelope. Harlan wiped his hands on a rag before taking it. "What's this?" Ramirez smiled faintly. "Final statement from the county office. The case has cleared your name completely. The fake business is dissolved, the land's legally yours, and the bank's restored every cent Mercer stole. It's done, Mr. Pierce." Harlan held the envelope for a long moment, then nodded. "You've done more than your duty, officer." Ramirez glanced at the workshop. "Looks like you've done some building of your own." "Trying to," Harlan said. "Not just wood and nails. The rest of it, too." Ramirez gave a respectful nod and left them to their peace. The sound of his engine faded down the road until only the creek remained. When the roof was finished, Harlan climbed down from the ladder and stood before the structure. The workshop gleamed softly in the sunlight, its windows catching the sky, its door perfectly fitted. He ran a hand along the frame, feeling the grain beneath his palm. It was the same way he had once touched the cradle he'd built for Maeve. The same reverence, the same quiet pride. Maeve stood beside him. "It's beautiful, Dad." He nodded. "It's home." They gathered by the porch that evening. The air turned cool, and the first stars blinked through the fading light. Dorian grilled corn over the small fire pit, the scent mingling with the smoke. Maeve laid out 3 plates, humming softly, an old tune Nora used to hum when the world felt too heavy. After they ate, Harlan rose and walked down to the creek. The water moved steady and sure, just as it always had. He took the brass key ring from his pocket, the one with the little fish charm that had followed him through every loss, every betrayal, every redemption. He turned it once in his hand, then knelt and placed it on the smooth stone beside the water. "Nora," he whispered. "We built again." He stayed there a long time, the sound of the creek washing through the quiet. The land around him no longer felt haunted. It felt like memory made solid. Every sorrow turned into something that could stand, hold weight, and last. When he returned to the porch, Maeve and Dorian were waiting. He sat between them, the firelight flickering across their faces. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full. Dorian spoke softly. "I used to think you worked so hard because you were afraid of losing what you built." Harlan looked at him, eyes steady. "No, I worked because I believed in what I built. There's a difference." The night deepened, and the stars grew thick above the pines. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and river water. Maeve leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Dad." He smiled faintly. "Wasn't alone then either. Just took me a while to notice." The fire crackled. The creek murmured. And for the first time in years, Harlan Pierce felt whole. Tomorrow, he would open the doors of his new workshop. The sign above it already waited, hand-carved, simple, and honest. Pierce and Family, Custom Woodworks. The story that began with a slammed door in the rain had found its ending beneath the same sky, on the same soil, but this time, with the light still burning inside. And as the last ember glowed red in the night, Harlan looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're home." Thank you for staying with Harlan until the very end. Tell me, what time is it where you're watching right now? And if you could whisper something to Harlan after all he's been through, what would it be? Share your thoughts and any story ideas you'd love to see next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another story that touches the heart.